Well, I want to thank Damien for his keynote address. Very good. I learned a lot of myself from what to expect, what might be coming. When I agreed to do this, I thought we'd at least be 3 beers in by now, talking about safety. So the Zoom meeting and the way that we've had to handle business over the course of the last several months is very different. So please bear with me as we go through safety. I know it's a topic everybody loves. I love it, so I know everybody else does. So let's get into it a little bit here. I'll just talk a little bit about worker safety and health in regards to all workplaces and what we found to be beneficial or relative and practical for companies. Through here. So a little bit about myself. I'm not going to talk too much about my history, but I'm a family man. I have 4 children, a wife. That kind of goes into the risk taker, I think, part of me. I had 3 children by the time I was 19 years old, and I am just a natural risk taker. So it makes me a very practical safety person, because I think a lot of our workers and a lot of us as individuals are probably naturally risk takers. And how I got into safety was I was a business owner and had a couple of fatalities with my own business, back to back, 30 days apart, completely unexpected. I had operated for 7 years prior to that and never had an issue. And so just kind of went back and reviewed what my own circumstances were, and went back and got an occupational safety and health degree. Now I've been doing safety for 20 plus years. I'm very passionate about safety. I do a lot of fatality investigations privately for companies, and every single one I do makes me just that much more passionate when you see the families that are affected by those, and the companies and the business owners that don't know how to move forward. But I'm also very practical. Safety can't be our very first line of business. We have to actually produce a product here. And by producing a product, safety comes into play. And a lot of our recipients of these products have a very high expectation for us, as well as our government. And that has changed over the years. 20 years ago, when I got into safety, that was not necessarily the case. We did it for workers' compensation reasons, maybe to avoid incidents, or potentially because of compliance with government regulations. But those regulations have changed quite a bit for agriculture over the years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to ask that if you have questions throughout the presentation, that you just use the chat to be able to ask those questions. And at the end, near the end of the presentation, we'll come back and we'll look at those and see if I haven't answered stuff as we kind of go through it. So as Michelle indicated, I'm the owner operator of Northwest Safety and Risk Services. We are a safety consulting company. We serve Idaho, Oregon, Washington, Montana, and even Alaska. And we work with in almost all industries, whether it's agriculture, construction, manufacturing, warehousing, and even government, to try and help employers meet their safety goals. And we do that through a number of different resources, whether it's risk control assessments, which we're going to be talking about and focusing a bit on today, or just hazard identification, or program and policy writing, and even, like I mentioned, accident investigations and staffing. So I'm going to talk about a few of the recent incidents that we've had locally. And when I say locally, I kind of mean regionally. And it's always interesting to me to determine, or what maybe I say, review some of these accidents and see what are likely for us. So in the past, these have happened just in the past couple of years, but we had a farmer of 5, father of 5, that was caught in a hay grinder, and all these local tragedies ended in fatality. We had 2 farmers that were buried in a trench collapse. We had a son that was a very difficult one, a young son, a teenage son that was caught in a garbage truck compactor. We had a dairy worker who was also trapped in a skid steer. we had a rancher that by chance backed up into a solar fence line and just got him just right and caused heart failure and therefore didn't survive. And then we had another worker whose clothing got caught around a shaft on a farm truck and got pulled into that shaft. Some other incidents that are notable incidents that caused injury was we had a multiple injury incident where multiple people were hospitalized during a construction collapse on a farm site. They were self-performing construction activities with their crew, and they had some knowledgeable people, but a lot of the folks there were not familiar with construction activities. Another one, a 12-year-old farm son was got their hand caught in a conveyor and injured their hand and arm significantly. And then we had a couple workers that ended up with major burns from dealing with some hot liquid that overflowed. And then an interesting one, a cowboy rancher and his horse were both injured when they were charged by a bull. I can think of these incidents happen, and as much as most safety people would like to say they were all preventable, in some of these cases, I think there was some chance that was involved in it. Some commonalities to the incidents in all types of incidents that we see is that 93% of them involve males. As males, we're just higher risk takers. That's the nature of our being, I guess. And in most of the cases, there was little or no planning beforehand, and there was no hazard assessment to determine what the risks actually were for it. In the majority of cases, it was seldom their first time doing the project or doing the task, which meant that over the multiple times they had done it, and sometimes over generations, they had never assessed what their real risks were. They had probably identified some of them mentally, but just hadn't really taken into consideration all of the factors. None of them, in all the cases that I've done with accident investigations and fatalities, I've never had an employer or other workers think that that was a possibility. In almost all cases, nobody believed that it would happen, or that it would happen specifically, sometimes even to the worker. Often the people that we think are our safest folks out there and our best leaders may take the highest risks. The lives and communities that these incidents happen in changes, not only for the employer and the owners of the company or organization, but also the family and communities that are affected by that are affected forever. And then the other thing I'd say is that in OSHA's perspective, all of these were preventable, which meant all the cases that I provided to you earlier, they all ended in regulatory citations, resulting in violations and penalties from OSHA. As we go into a new administration, historically, a more liberal administration is more so to enforce OSHA regulations. We have an expectation right now, and I had a meeting with OSHA yesterday out of the regional office, that their expectation, meaning for their compliance officers, is that several new regulations will probably be rolling out in the very short term. It's already difficult to manage all aspects of safety and safety regulations, even when you're trying. And when we have more that will be coming out, we got to get it kind of ahead of that, is my recommendation. All right, so when we talk about safety, and when I just think of the word safe, I was watching a movie, kind of Netflix and chilling with my wife during the pandemic, and we had watching a movie Godless, or a series Godless, and one of the quotes that came from that I recognized was, the word safe is a funny word. Sometimes it means something different to one person who says it and the person who hears it. We've got to recognize that for our workers, or even when we're talking amongst management and we use the word safe or safety, that's perceived as different things for different people. I'm going to talk to you about what it means for me and some definitions here. So as we talk about, and we kind of go through the presentation, and by the way, I'm going to offer this presentation to anybody who'd like to have it. So you'll have it for review if you make that request. And I'm sure Michelle and Jackie can probably help me with that. So definitions. When I talk about a hazard, I'm talking about something that's capable of causing human injury or a health condition. But that's not it. It also could mean property or environmental damage. Think about hazard as the potential for harm. When we think about risk, think about it as the likelihood that that hazard would actually occur. You know, how many employees are exposed to the hazards, you know, how frequently do we do the task that creates the hazard, things of that nature. And safety for me, and how I define safety, is basically our judgment of what's acceptable risk. We all do this as individuals, whether it's, hey, I got to drive to the grocery store today. I know there is a potential that, you know, another driver could strike my vehicle, and I may never make it back to the home or make it back to the office, but I feel like it's safe enough that it's an acceptable risk to me. And that's something we can all relate with. But thinking about safety and talking about safety with our workers, usually we need to refer to what they feel is acceptable and identify what they feel is an acceptable level of risk. It may not be the same as what we're asking for. Right? You've probably heard the word safety culture a million times. You probably hear it from your insurers. You probably hear it from, you know, your customers or your clients, all about safety culture. When we're talking about culture today, I want you to think about it. It's just the way things are, you know, the way things are in our organization, in our company, in our work groups. Culture usually is what we consider to be shared experiences. These could even be things like legends or stories that we are, that kind of affect the way that we handle or practice, you know, business or even tasks from time to time. They're learned through interactions. You know, when I think about culture and adult learning, most people learn this stuff through interaction, meaning that they're involved in it and they understand what the ultimate goal is. For myself, a lot of times I'd like to say that I learn through observation. There's not a task that probably most of us don't feel like we could observe long enough that we couldn't just jump in and do safely. So learning the different ways, both through interactions and observations, is our goal, and that would be effective for most people. Now, attitude, safety attitude. This comes from a company's culture and the outcome of personal experiences, individual experiences while performing dangerous activities. Okay, my attitude to drive down to the store is that the risk is so low, probably not going to happen. I'm willing to take that risk. It's dangerous. I know it is. More people get killed on the roadways than in any other work activity. And that's not something OSHA focuses on, though it's focused on by the Department of Transportation. But the roadway being the most dangerous potential I usually have most days, I still have this attitude like, well, I wear a seatbelt, you know, I drive a pretty safe car. I haven't had an incident for years. So even though it's a dangerous activity, my attitude is that. So I'm going to talk about kind of how we start preparing and planting the safety seed. And, you know, I'm going to ask to you guys and just think to yourselves, have you ever thought, you know, with your workers, they do what they want when I'm not looking. So they're going to do the right thing when the management, the supervisor, the safety guy's there. But when nobody's around, they're going to do their own thing. And, you know, I've trained them, I've given them the equipment. I holler and yell about it all the time, but they just don't listen. They don't listen to safety. I can't control their actions. and I can't, lose these folks. And this is one I've heard regularly, probably for the last 3 to 5 years, is, I just can't lose these people because I won't be able to find replacements in time based on what we're trying to accomplish. So most of us have thought that. I've thought those same circumstances in my past as a business owner and as a business owner now. Sometimes it's hard to get buy-in. I'm going to talk a little bit, and probably most of you have seen this quote in the past, for the want of a nail. But this is where I'm going to start off with kind of some of the small things, right? The small things that we have in the workplace usually add up to big things. So for the one of the nail, the shoe was lost. For the one of a shoe, the horse was lost. For the one of a horse, the rider was lost. For the one of the rider, the message was lost. And for the one of the message, the battle was lost. For the one of the battle, the kingdom was lost, right? And all of this from the want of a single horseshoe nail. Right? We've got to start with the little things, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more as to how we start with the little things, and ultimately, we accomplish the goal in the end. Right? So I'm going to make some recommendations today, and these are recommendations that I've seen be effective with many of our clients over the years. And our focus normally is at the worker or employee level. Most management owner buy-in is there. They want to do the right thing. They want to see their people go home. They don't want to have to deal with regulatory issues or anything like that. So the recommendations I'm making are based on some of my experiences. Don't spend significant amount of time about focusing on site safety statistics. I could tell you all day long about statistics in agriculture when it comes to safety. Ultimately, that doesn't focus on the individual that's right in front of you. So my recommendation is always focus on the individuals that are right in front of you, which means you got to get in front of those individuals, right? Do discuss actual incidents that you are aware of and that are relevant. Talk about things that have happened in the past. Talk about things that happen at other growers or other facilities. Work together, and sometimes, even though often we may be competing, it's good for us to work together to identify some of these stories. Obviously, we want to consider people's confidentiality in doing this, but make it relative to the workers is much more powerful than any statistic that you'd ever give them. If you told me today, Aaron, last year 28,000 people died on the road, aren't you worried about dying on the road? No, I'm not really worried about that. If you told me today that more people have died from opioid crisis since March than COVID, am I worried about opioids? No, I'm not so worried about opioids because I know how to avoid those, right? Do focus on the ways that achieve success, and don't focus on avoiding failure. This is what I call like the pat on the back, right? When people are doing what you want them to do, give them a pat on the back. Don't focus on the areas where they're not, quite meeting the ultimate goal or achievement level that you're hoping for. That will build over time, and they will start to achieve the expectations. All right. So when I talk about train and support the safety binds, right, we're thinking about what can we do? We may be in a place where we're not sure where to start. What is effective? What isn't effective? This is what we found to be effective. Management leadership. And when I mean management leadership, I mean leading by example. When you're out there, often us as owners, we know that there's an exemption, or maybe you don't, but there's an exemption in OSHA for owners to follow the safety regulations. But that is very dangerous practice, because when they're learning from what they observe, when they observe us not being safe or being accountable for our own actions, then that can lead to tragedy. I also say accountability with accountability for your workers. There is a time when a worker may need to be disciplined, and creating accountability within the organization, or even supervisors that allow for certain activities to occur under their supervision, need to be held accountable for the actions. The second most important piece, and I can't stress this enough, is worker involvement. If you just tell the worker to do something and you don't get them involved in creating a solution, you will not find it to be meaningful. So that worker involvement is very meaningful. You'll find the greatest links of success during that. Also, effective safety and health programs, they identify their hazards. We're going to talk about hazard identification today and ways to identify hazards, and then ways, obviously, to educate and train our workers and put in place hazard prevention and control so that we can all sleep a little bit better at night. And even when we're operating 24 hours a day, we can go home at the end of the day and we don't have to worry about what's going to happen. We have all these things in place to help prevent incidents from occurring, right? The last piece of this is just program evaluation and improvement. When I think about an effective safety and health program, it should be fluid. Our activities and change from time to time, or even maybe more frequently than that. But we need to evaluate, is what we were doing, is it still effective, right? Is there areas of improvement for us to make? And if so, let's go back to the other areas, get the workers back involved, create accountability, identify new hazards or changes in the workplace, and then educate our people to it and create hazard prevention and control. If you want workers buy-in, the biggest thing I see and why we work at a workers level is you have to get them involved. Management and supervisors can do a lot in regards to oversight of activities, but the goal would be that they're going to do it whether you're there or not. If they're involved in the safety program, they likely are going to do what they recognize. When I put here perceive, not just receive, we want them to perceive what the risks are and make a safety judgment on their own that we would agree with. They can't just receive the information. We do lots of employee training, whether it's equipment training or new employee orientation or whatever it may be. In those cases, a lot of times they're receiving the information, but they're not really perceiving the hazards associated with the task or the control measures they should be taking or being held accountable to, because they don't have the experiences that we have. And so we want them to gain those experiences safely, obviously, but we want them to make good judgment in this. I use this parenting analogy. A lot of times I discuss with business owners, what their struggles are with safety in their organization. And part of that is just, I can't hold their hand all the time, right? Well, think of it as a parenting analogy. The goal is to get them to do the right thing when no one is looking. If I want my, last child in the home is 13 and she is, going on 21. If I want her to avoid doing stuff, then I've got to be a good parent to her. I got to teach her how to do the right thing when no one is watching, and what the benefit to that is for her personally. Same thing with our employees. We want them to understand the benefit personally for them, and we can kind of use that parenting analogy. At some point, we have to trust that they're going to do the right thing, and we have to let them out on their own. But at first, it takes a little bit of special care, right? So I'm going to get into hazard and risk assessments. We talked about what an effective safety program is, and following worker involvement, we need to assess what our potentials are and what the hazards are. So identifying the hazards. This can actually be very difficult to do. Most of us have the knowledge, and most of our workers have the knowledge to be able to identify the hazards, but no time has been taken to document that and evaluate those hazards. What I mean by that is they may be very low risk, and that doesn't mean that we can look them over, but they may not need to be addressed immediately. Determine what control measures are effective. And when I come back to effective, I mean, what's practical? What's going to work in your own organization? Each organization has its own characteristics. And we want to make sure that as we put things into place, we're not just purchasing some 800-page safety program manual, but we are actually looking at what is effective for our people. How is the best way that we're going to be able to address this? After we've identified the hazards and we've evaluated what those risks are, how do we put controls into place? We want to implement and document those controls. OSHA has a regulation that I found that a lot of growers are surprised with, and that is that they have a program, basically assessment requirement, whether it's for personal protective equipment or in many other regulations. We have to identify and document what risks the employees are exposed to and what our control measures are. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we got to monitor and review those hazard controls. Are they being followed? Is everything going as expected? Can we still get our hands on the equipment that we, determined we would use? This is one that's come up multiple times this year for my growers, and that's, we had N95s or respiratory dust protection in a lot of the facilities. Now it's more difficult to get your hands on that equipment. So, people are wearing bandanas or, cotton face covers or something of that nature. And it's really not effective as far as the goal we were trying to reach. So what can we do differently? And figure out if there's another control we can put into place. Hazard identification, that's the first step that we're going to take. Okay. What's the potential that could cause workers injury, illness, even things like property damage? When we talk about incident, don't just consider the potential for a worker to get hurt. You probably heard before about 1 in every 40 near misses ends up in a serious accident, and about 1 in every 60 or so serious accidents end up in a fatality. It's a roll of the dice. If you're taking the risks and you haven't evaluated the hazards, that you're going to have a potential there. Okay. So let's talk about the types of hazards we actually deal with in the hops community. Right? By far, above all else is attitude and behavior. We are dealing with workers who are by nature risky in most cases. Primarily men, and many of us have this, I can do it, I can get the job done attitude. I'm one of those guys too. You put something in front of me and I see what the end goal is, I'm going to try and be as intuitive as possible to try and get that done so that I get that pat on the back. I may be taking risks during that when nobody else is looking. I got caught just recently, operating a saw by my wife when I wasn't wearing safety glasses, and nobody was around. I thought, I just need to make one cut, and I had left my safety glasses inside. And so attitude, what is our acceptable level of safety? What is our acceptable level of risk? And that changes our behavior. As you know, these other ones are all based off of OSHA statistics. What are the biggest risks and they're not in any necessary order for 2020, but just if we look at like a 5-year picture here, tractors and tractor attachments, whether it's pull behind carts or trailers or field implements, whatever it is, tractors and attachments, they're some of the leading causes. Transportation is another one. And although OSHA doesn't have a big focus on transportation, we're always transporting stuff in between our fields, our facilities, and the risk is there, and it's one of the main causes for hazards hazard exposures to employees. Okay. Equipment and machinery that we operate, whether it's the control of while it's being maintained or while it's being operated. Even things like housekeeping come into this equipment and machinery hazards. We think about physical Physical labor, lifting, moving, materials, physical hazards are obviously there, and chemical and biological hazards. Chemical probably more so, but I group chemical and biological together because they're very close in regards to the risks that are associated with them. And whether it's we're doing spray applications or chemication applications, or we just have exposures like biological exposures when somebody is injured and we're trying to care for them. Of course, electricity is a big factor. I didn't, in the recent incidents in our region, there was one that I left out, and that was a worker who was trying to place a irrigation pipe, and they were working right underneath a overhead power line. And during the investigation, I thought to myself, how could this have even happened? Power line's pretty clearly there. Why would this worker even need to stand this irrigation pipe up on end? Well, I found later it was a pretty normal practice to be able to gain momentum with the irrigation pipe. But unfortunately, the worker struck that pipe or struck the pipe with the overhead power line, and they're still alive today, but they've lost all 4 of their limbs. That's going to change their life, obviously, and their family's lives forever. Also, when we think about environment, we're always dealing with the environment. As farmers, ranchers, growers, we are thinking about how the environment impacts our production. But environment also creates hazards for our workers too. Sometimes we're still trying to manage tasks, although environmental conditions may not be, the best or, suitable for the operation. So I want you to think about the hazards in your workplace and start to identify what those hazards are. I'm sure many of you have started to do this. The question is, have you started to document how you're going to control these hazards? Have you put some standard operating procedures into place? And we'll come back to that. All right. The hazard identification evaluation process. I want you to apply it to all types of activities, whether they're routine or non-routine activities. Think about when we have new processes. Generally, new processes create high levels of risk. Okay? New tools, new machinery, new equipment that we're putting in place. We're always trying to innovate and make higher production levels in our pickers or dryers or anything like that. Think about how does this new equipment, this new machinery, how are employees affected by it? Even things like changes in the task or services that we're providing. How does that reflect to our workers in the hazards that they're exposed to, or even us as individuals? How are we exposed to that? Also, what the hazards can be when an accident or emergency happens, because it does happen. It's very likely that at some point in time, an owner is going to experience an accident or an emergency at their site. So we need to account for how do we deal with these things, right? And what risks do those accidents end up creating? Okay? All the hazards should be evaluated and, if feasible, eliminated or controlled. And we'll talk about elimination process here. Identifying these workplace hazards establishes, the minimum protocol. And what we're going to talk about just a bit is creating job hazard analysis. They may be referred to as job safety analysis, job safety assessments, job hazard assessments. They all mean the same thing. So I'm going to call them job hazard analysis, which is not only identifying the hazards, but then coming back and doing a risk control to identify if, what the potentials are for them. A job hazard analysis is just simply a technique that is a method of identifying and controlling these hazards. Basically listing out each task and the hazards associated with it and the controls. It should include things like the tools and method of the work procedures. Okay? In basic, we're going to select a job. We're going to break it down step by step. We're going to identify those potential hazards, and we're going to develop solutions. And we're going to get employees involved in this. Like I said, employee worker involvement is the best way to do this. We could go out there as part of your safety team, or management or supervisor could go out and do a JSA and start to break it down. But we may not recognize all of the steps without getting employees involved in it, or the steps that they're taking we're unaware of, and what hazards those may create. But also, we're not going to get their buy-in on the solution if we don't get them involved in doing the assessment. Okay? So why is this necessary? Well, first, we want to see people get home safely. And so this is a good way to try and get peace of mind for making sure folks get home safely. Beyond that, it's a regulatory requirement. So OSHA requires us for agricultural operations that they identify those and they meet the requirements of the regulation by prioritizing their corrective actions. If we're starting out fresh with safety and we've had a smaller crew, 12, 15 people, easily supervised, and now we're building up and we have more and more activities occurring and more workers there, and we're starting out from scratch, you're not going to accomplish this in a day. You're not going to accomplish this in a month, likely not even within a year. So prioritize your corrective actions based on the most significant hazards and most frequent occurrences. And then establish these proper job procedures and ensure that all employees understand and that they're trained to them. We have a communications problem with a lot of growers, where we have primarily a Hispanic population of workers that they may not understand the word hazard the way that we do, or the word safety the way that we do. So we need to get them involved to kind of understand, and get them involved also in training each other. If we do this and we nurture and care for our safety, you may feel like, hey, I just can't get to where we need to be from here. Which way do I start? Which way do I go? I like to think about the old Johnny Cash song, "One Piece at a Time," right? If we take it just one piece at a time, we'll ultimately get to where we're trying to go. Don't try and accomplish too much at one point in time. Focus on the big hazards, the big risks, the things that are most likely to occur, and start to break it down from there. Few other recommendations I have for our leaders, right? Don't let others know the expectation to stop, or I should say, do let others know the expectation to stop operations in a controlled manner if something unsafe is happening. OSHA gives all workers in the U.S. the right to stop work, but we want to support that in a way that is beneficial. And I mean by that is when they recognize that there is an unexpected occurrence, or that there's a risk that's beyond their personal or our organization's expectations, then they should have the right to stop those activities. You want the people in the field for you, or in your facility, I may say, you want them to take action, so that you don't necessarily have to. Then you can address those concerns. Don't stress the compliance aspect. I know with the OSHA regulations and the citations that some of you have seen in the past, sometimes it's easy to get refocused on compliance and trying to commit to complying with all the safety and environmental laws. Okay. The intent is to focus on the workers and the prevention for the workers, and take that as your path forward. Don't make statements like, "I won't tolerate any accidents on my watch." We want workers to report to us and not discourage them. We want them to report to us when there's unsafe conditions, so that we can take action to make sure they're controlled. All right. Do convey to your personnel your commitment to a safe workplace. I always say that it works best if somebody tells me that they care about me. right? I'm going to listen to, if I'm doing something unsafe and they say, hey man, I'm worried about what's going to happen to you if you keep on going that route. So I want you to know your safety is important to me and your well-being are important to me. It's hard to do that when you have 250 employees to touch base with every single employee. This should be a trickle-down effect. You're working with your management, telling them how much you care about them and the workers. They're relating that back down to the person. And when you have the opportunity to get in front of a worker, you recognize that you do want to see them go home safely, right? And that you care about their family situation and their well-being. Don't communicate the expectation that employees should fix or report unsafe, or I should say, do communicate the expectation that employees should fix or report unsafe conditions. Like I mentioned, a lot of unsafe conditions are based on attitude and behavior. So the employees ultimately can do the best job at correcting those situations. You want them to report back to you if there's a problem. But if they can fix it themselves out on site to your level of expectation, that's fantastic. Okay. Do stress that safety is something that's valued in your organization. We're not doing it because the insurance company makes us do it. We're not doing it because of OSHA. We're not doing it because Aaron, the safety guy, said we had to. We're doing it because we value it, right? And don't stress do stress the impact of our decisions on others' safety. We want everybody to know that one unsafe individual or even us being unsafe around our employees could impact the others in the facility. I also say, go ahead.
Question, and it actually relates really closely to that.
Okay, absolutely.
The person asked, how do you handle pushback from your superior or company if you are in compliance regulation position, but feel you are not receiving the proper support or buy-in from higher ups?
Absolutely. Very good question. So I make it relative, just like I would with a worker. Make it relative to them. What ultimately could be the effect on the organization? Not by way of threatening, hey, you're going to, have to deal with all these citations and penalties from OSHA if we don't do the right thing. But more so, what would happen if a worker died or was seriously injured? How would that affect production within an organization? How would it affect attitude with other workers? I also take it back to, how are they sleeping at night if they know that there's risks out there that aren't being managed? Are they willing to let workers die? So I try and make it relative to the operations owner, and also just have discussion, open discussions. Their definition of safety may be different than the in-house safety individuals. So try and get on the same page and find a way that you can both move forward and be practical about it. I do see sometimes safety professionals that are impractical in their expectations. They want to take everything on all at once. They want to see immediate change in organization. So planning and preparing and setting goal dates with the owners is usually the best way to move that forward. So training, whether it's owners or employees, we need to provide adequate training for the tasks at hand. Owners and management, they need to understand the tasks that are being conducted and the hazards or risks that are associated with those two. OSHA has a large emphasis right now and an emphasis program on what we call seasonal or temporary workers. They require that we train them to the same level as we would train any of our other workers. So we want to make sure that they're aware of the dangers. And often we may get workers that are only going to be there for a few days. Are we going to spend 8 hours of new employee orientation with them right off the bat? Well, that's not the expectation, and that's maybe not practical. But we're going to partner them with somebody that has been through that training, and we're going to at least train them to the dangers of the job. I don't care how much guarding you put on in a facility or how much effort you make with your own tools and equipment. if an employee doesn't understand the danger of, if I don't reach behind that guard, or if if they don't recognize that if they're doing maintenance or cleanup and they reach behind that guard, they're still going to get caught up in it and it's going to cause injury. Train to the dangers, right? Give additional and frequent reminders. Awareness with workers is the most effective tool we can have. We shouldn't talk about safety once a year. Shouldn't have a safety week once a year. This should be regular and frequent. It should be coming from all levels of the organization, from the owners to management to supervisors, leads, and workers should be talking amongst themselves to raise the level of awareness when it comes to safety. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to kind of move forward on this risk assessment stuff a little faster. With the risk assessment, we talked about evaluating these. When we talk about risk assessment, we're thinking about what the potential is in the process. How many people are going to be affected by this? Is it something that we have 30 employees exposed to or 1 employee exposed to? Well, that's going to reduce the potential. How often are they going to have to do it? That's going to reduce the potential associated with it. Also consider things like how urgent is the action needed. If it's an urgent thing, we may need to focus our safety attention on that until we can accomplish the goal. So evaluating these risk assessments, think about how severe is the hazard. What could it cause in regards to injury, illness, property damage, and so forth. Look at your history. This is a good way to start. Have we had a lot of, back injuries? Okay, well, that might be an area that we want to try and focus our attention on immediately. Or maybe we've had a lot of hand injuries or whatever it may be, vehicle accidents. Identify where you want to try and focus your energy first. Okay. So we talked about a little bit about the likelihood already, and I'm going to kind of move forward to the risk assessment. Okay, further into the risk assessment and then just risk controls here. Other places where you can find information when you're trying to develop a job safety analysis and identify risk is look to the product information. Obviously, that's good with our chemical safety, but also with our equipment manufacturers. Think about past experiences when you're including workers and get them to discuss some of what they've seen at other growers or at other facilities, and get their input also to help identify what the potentials are. We can always look to OSHA, NIOSH, ASTM, a number of associations have information on safety and how to do stuff safely. In the agricultural industry, this information is less than any other industry. There's less references if you try to research safety in agriculture than there may be in construction or general industry or manufacturing. That's because OSHA didn't hold agriculture to the same level as these other industries until just recently, 2016. Some of the exemptions went away for agricultural organizations that are over 10 employees. Okay? Industry standards and best practices. Talk to our neighbors. Think about, how are you guys doing this? How are you doing it safely? How are you avoiding the risk associated with it? Okay. So I talked about looking at our last stuff, but really it comes down with our risk assessment when determining how likely it is for the worker that might be exposed to the hazard. Consideration should be given to a number of exposure factors, these different factors. And frequency, duration, and method are those 3 factors that we're looking at. Okay, what's the potential? What's the frequency? What's the duration? And the method for it. All right, we want to ultimately create a hazard action plan. Create corrective measures, identify what those corrective measures are, and then identify who's responsible for them. What workers are we going to get into place to be responsible? What leaders are we going to put into place to help make sure that we meet a target date? If we just say, hey, we know we need to do this, and we never start moving forward on it, it's likely it's never going to occur, that we're never going to reach the ultimate goal. So set target dates. Don't set them 100 of them out there. set one at a time. We're going to work on this. This is our target to be able to complete it. Right? Use a hierarchy of controls. We talked a little bit about this with the hazards that we face. First, if we can eliminate, the best things would be eliminate the job task. On many farms that I work on, I see tasks being done for absolutely no reason other than to keep workers busy. There's a risk associated with that. So identify if we can eliminate the activity altogether, if it's even necessary. Substitution. Substitute out hazardous products with less hazardous products when applicable and when you can. Engineering controls, these things come to like ventilation, guarding, things of that nature. It's a physical block from the worker to the hazard, putting something in place where they cannot be exposed. We've controlled it with an engineering control. Warnings like signs and alarms and things like that. This is where we start to get into the less effective methods here, because this means that human nature comes into play and behavior and attitude come into play. I've drove by the speed limit sign in my neighborhood 100 times this month. I can't remember what it says. I know that I'm only supposed to go about 10 to 15 miles per hour in the neighborhood, so I do it. Warnings aren't that effective if I'm not paying attention to them. Administrative controls. This comes into training. And why would you say training is on the lesser side of effectiveness? Well, that's because they have to understand exactly what you're asking them to do. It's got to be practical, and they have to feel like they can implement it and be successful. Things like policies and work schedules and stuff like that are administrative controls that we can put into place. And then personal protective equipment. That should be our last resort. When we recognize a hazard, many of us jump right to, putting our people in personal protective equipment. There's an eye hazard, so instead of using elimination of the job or substitution or an engineering control, we just throw safety glasses on them, and we think that that's an effective means. PPE should only be used as our last result. Okay? All right, so I'm going to move forward on a couple of these, and I kind of broke each one of those down in the presentation, but I've already spoke to them. When we think about corrective strategy examples, some things that I've seen work very well for our growers is trying to eliminate the source. If we can eliminate the source of potential, that's going to be great. Substitute with less hazardous or equivalent, right? Remove the person from the hazard. Not a lot of people like to hear this, but robots, automated processes, this reduces exposure to workers, and therefore, meets our safety goals. Isolate the hazards with barricades, things of that nature, so that workers know they can't get into them, that they're not supposed to. And dilute the hazard. This could be chemical or ventilation. These are all great strategies, and we're trying to identify how to control. Next thing I'm going to say is watch the safety grow. In your organization, it will grow. Once we put these risk control measures into place and we are following them ourselves and we start to get buy-in by the workers, these control measures start to build on their own. It takes time. It takes patience to watch this grow. Some things I say with controls is, along with that job hazard analysis, do task-specific training. Have your leaders in the work field do this task-specific. Show people how to do it safely. Have their buy-in out in the field, right? And as risk controls are implemented, we're going to be able to harvest on that safety. We're going to get a product out of it in the end. For most of our clients, they often see better production levels because people feel safer at work. They see more of a team influence in there, which means they find better production levels. Employees aren't working against each other. I put it here kind of what you'll see on there, culture harvested, how it will look over time if you start to implement some of this. So some of you might be at what I call the reactive stage. This is the seedling stage, right? There's minimal effort being put towards safety. If there is, it's usually compliance driven, and there's a lack of involvement, either with management or employees. We're going off people's instincts there. As it first starts to grow, it's off instinct, right? The next level is what some of you may be at too, dependent, where it's more of enforcement, conditions of employment, supervisor control, where we're doing training and we're giving them rules and fear of discipline. This requires supervision level. We were trying to get on the upside of that. Go ahead.
Aaron, apologies, just to jump in. We're getting close to about 5 minutes left here to stay on schedule. So I just wanted to give that 5-minute warning and remind people to put any questions in the Q&A box. But sorry to interrupt.
No problem. And I can answer back some of those questions following the presentation too, if possible. The next level I'd say here is independent, right? That they have a personal knowledge and they have a personal commitment. They care for themselves. They practice good habits, right? This is self-driven. And interdependent is where we ultimately want to get to. We have safe attitudes. They're each other's keepers. They're looking out for one another, and they have organizational pride. They're happy to be there. This is what we call team. We want to get to that interdependent team effort in the long run. Avoid the norms and the assumptions. Often I'll see management say it's okay to not do all the safety stuff that we're trying to implement and put in place because we're in a hurry, or it's just a short job, and it's a now or never type thing. Remove the assumptions that because it takes too long to do it the safe way, or we've done it this way and for generations and we haven't gotten hurt, that it's acceptable, and we assume that it's acceptable to take unnecessary risks. I'm gonna talk about a couple of little. I got a couple of quotes in here from Jocko Willink, and I like some of his quotes. But he has a quote, and I like to call it the little things. You have to be vigilant. You have to be on guard, and you have to hold the line on the seemingly insignificant little things that shouldn't really matter, but they do. So when we talk about the little things, try to make sure that you're addressing it at the smallest level first. And then buy into the big thing here. You must own everything in your world. There is no one else to blame. So if you aren't seeing success in your safety program, you have to start to own it. And employees start to have to own it. All right, with that, I've got a few minutes here for any questions. Let's see if we can, see if I can pull up the chat real quick. Hey, Michelle, do you see any questions on the chat there?
I don't, but I have a question for you. So, Aaron, as a business owner yourself, right? What, people maybe not think about you guys and how you built your culture within your own company. What were some of the key takeaways? I know you talked about a lot of different ways we can do that, but what were ways to motivate your employees to get on the safety train? And I mean, they're going out to different types of places all the time, right?
Mm-hmm. So
what
good.
Motivate them.
So motivation, right? The best thing I've seen with motivation is not safety prizes or handouts or anything like that. Bringing people together and getting a sense of community will be your best motivator, right? When we bring our work groups together and they get to know each other and we get to know them, that starts to create a sense of community, and they'll start to behave the way that you want them to by that. Yeah, there is some benefits, I think, to having, safety programs that kind of reinforce their activities. But ultimately, those things make minimal changes in organizations. So those are things that, like, after we get that sense of community and pride in our workplace, then those things can be implemented, but they shouldn't be the driving factor. Did I answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
hopefully. I have lots of suggestions, so lots of recommendations. You'll see here, my email is there. So if you had a question, you didn't want to ask a safety question, I know safety is a very touchy subject. None of us want to, shed our negative situations maybe with everybody else in the group. So if you have a safety question, my email is there for you. It's all private and confidential. If you email me or communicate with us, we keep that private and confidential.
Okay.
I'd like to end kind of by saying, hey, thank you. We were recommended by Obendorf Farms, who we work with, to work with the Idaho Hop Growers Commission to provide some safety this year. I'd like to thank the American Hop Convention for allowing me to speak and follow Damien's great speech. I know kind of drowned you with safety here, hopefully not, but anyways, I think all the participants have stayed on board for this conversation, and there's assistance out there, there's help, and there's a lot of ways that you can just be led in the right direction. You can find us, of course, at our website, northwestsafety.com. We have a blog there that once a week I write an article addressing different safety concerns. You can go back onto our website and see all the ones that we've written in the past. Of course, we have Facebook, Indeed, Twitter, stuff like that. Or you can contact us at our local number or our 1-800 number.
Perfect. Thanks, Aaron. We do have actually one final
Okay.
question that we'll kind of wrap up with before we move on. What are your thoughts on inviting safety risk assessments?
What are my thoughts on inviting what?
It was on inviting safety risk assessments. Maybe this is like a third-party thing, something that you guys would do. I don't know. They didn't specify much more than that.
Okay. Well, we may be able to get some more clarification to the question, but if it's inviting someone in, make sure that they really understand your business. I mean, that's the biggest part of that, is that you may find that OSHA has an outreach program and they're more than willing to come in, free of charge and help you do an assessment. And then you have so long to take corrective actions on what they identify before it gets turned over to compliance. That is a beneficial program if you're willing to make the changes. The problem that I see with that and sometimes other consulting or safety groups is that they don't really have a good understanding about what you do or your organization's goals. So that should be the first discussion when you're inviting someone in to try and help identify hazards and what the potentials are, and also somebody that's practical with what the expectations are themselves.
Perfect. Yeah, I really appreciate your message today. I have seen it on our farm firsthand that culture really plays the biggest part in improving worker safety, and there's always room for improvement, I think, also. So thanks
Absolutely.
so much, Aaron. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the time. Thank you, everyone.